death during the terror, but that was part of the Civil War. About 16,000 people were sentenced to death by the revolutionary courts during the terror, of which, again, more than half were part of the military commissions out in the Civil War. They were punishing resistors and that kind of thing. Only, and the number is 2,639 were executed in Paris. So although we have that image of thousands and thousands and thousands of people being killed, it's not the Holocaust. It's not a huge event that way. So, legacies. After Robespierre is gone, the terror is dismantled, and France comes a little bit back to its senses. The government that's put in place, as I said, is more conservative. It's what they call a bourgeois democracy, so sort of middle-center democracy. It's not very exciting. Students usually lose interest after 1794 anyway. The vote is restricted. There's too many checks and balances in the government too. They're so worried about the terror coming back that they basically have all these measures in place to prevent anyone getting any power, which means that no one has any power to get anything done. So it's a very ineffective government. There's still unrest, and order deteriorates to the point where a strong central figure, not unlike a king, is desired. Seems like a really good idea. They want someone who can instill law and order, who gives a sense of legitimacy again to the government, to tie up all the loose ends that the revolution has unraveled. So, only 10 years after the beginning, we're back to an authoritarian government with Napoleon Bonaparte. The sense of returning to where we started is even more complete in 1815. I'm not going to lecture on Napoleon today, but of course you know he becomes emperor in 1804. He goes through a rampage of Europe, trying to control all of it for about 10, 12 years. But in 1815, when he's deposed and defeated, the forces of conservatism are back, and there's a Bourbon king back on the throne. He is a successor of Louis XVI. Louis XVIII comes to the throne in 1815 with the restoration of the monarchy. So, from a certain perspective, we would be within our rights to ask, did any of this matter? 25 years later, we're back to a king again. Of course, I'm a revolutionary historian, so my answer is going to be yes. The saying goes, what was the influence of the French Revolution? And the answer is, we don't know, it's not over yet, because all of these changes are still very much present in our society. Look at we in our Western society owe to the French Revolution. Universal male suffrage, okay, and popular sovereignty. The inalienability of human rights and civil rights. The idea that you cannot infringe upon those rights. They're inalienable. Okay? Even our terms, when we say left-wing and right-wing government, when we say left and right in politics, that actually comes from where people sat in the National Assembly in the French Revolution. The ones who were more liberal sat on the left, and the ones who were more conservative sat on the right. That's where left and right comes from. I rest my case. The revolution also enshrines the notion of national sovereignty. Okay? Nations, not kings, not hereditary elites, not churches, nations are the supreme authority in human affairs. Even though the revolution seemed to be defeated a generation later by an alliance of kings and vengeful nobles and priests, a new principle of political legitimacy had been launched. All right? There was a century of nationalistic upheaval after that. Right? The 19th century is a period in which people in country after country rise up and overthrow authoritarian governments. This is when Germany is unified, when Italy is unified, nationalistic movements everywhere. These are all following on from the French Revolution. The 1848 revolutions, all of the nationalistic posturing that led to World War I as well. Within 100 years of 1815, the sovereignty of nations had been accepted throughout Europe and the Americas. Okay, that notion of national sovereignty. In the 20th century, it would be evoked against Europeans, interestingly, because all of the colonies that they had established, especially in the 19th century, were using this principle of national sovereignty to throw out their colonizers. So it's used against them. Now, the revolutionary legacy isn't perfect, as I suggested. In 1789, they didn't imagine that national sovereignty could be used in any way except representatively. They didn't picture the terror. They didn't picture how Napoleon could appropriate their concept of national sovereignty to legitimize what was essentially a dictatorship. Okay? And a lot of people, a lot of historians, have looked at totalitarianism in the 20th century, at totalitarian democracy, and they can trace those roots to the revolution as well. Okay? The same ideas that motivated Robespierre to saying, I know the will of the people, I will establish order, is very similar to what happened in the interwar period in the 20th century. And while we can talk about universal male suffrage, it didn't include women, okay? It didn't include servants or the unemployed either. All adult males over 25, unless you were a servant of someone else, an actual domestic, or unless you were unemployed. And although the people in the streets had saved the revolution in 1789, and they pushed it further in 1793 and 1794, the fear of that popular power in the streets, the fear of the terror, actually served to repress popular politics for the first part of the 19th century. During the 1830 and the 1848 revolutions, popular revolts were put down because people were looking back to the revolution and saying, look what happens when the people in the streets get too much power. But in that, as in other ways, the revolution ushered in the mental world that we still live in today. Power, authority, institutions were no longer sacred. They could be criticized. You could look at the government and say, we can do better than this. This is a problem. So all of these things are subject to examination. We can use our critical faculties to look at the way society is organized and reorganize it. And we also still raise our voices in protest when human rights are threatened. Okay? It's still an issue that happened in 1789. So for all of these reasons, I rest my case that July 14th of 1789 was a day that shook the world.